This is the Open University.
It's the rainy season, and it's my last vlog from Japan this year, actually, because I'm about to fly a week yesterday, flying with Aeroflot to initially to Moscow and then to Frankfurt, and thence I think I'll have a few days in Paris. Just spend that time until the end of the month, and then I have a new life beginning in Berlin. And I think that's one reason why I've been doing all these cabaret songs and sort of Weimar Republic tinged piano ballads, not just because there is a piano lurking in this pottery showroom that I've been staying in for the last month or so, but also because I want to get back into touch with the German mentality, which the particular strand of it I choose to be in touch with is the Weimar Republic German mentality. So I've been going back to 1929. You may have seen my video posted earlier this week of the Ballad of Sexual Dependency by Brecht and Weill from the Threepenny Opera, written in 1928. So that magical little socialist republic in Berlin before the Nazis took over is somehow relevant to me, and maybe it's historically relevant, unfortunately, to the rest of the world right now, because we do seem to be in a time of precarity in which the fascists are once again threatening to take over. A lot of very totalitarian moves coming from the other side of the Atlantic, and perhaps we need Brecht and Weill more than ever. So it's a period of transition for me. I've got parish notes for you today. Basically, this is just a lot of little bang, bang, bang micro targets which I'm going to be hitting. I don't have an overarching theme, but maybe one will emerge. This will be interesting to note. So it's a period of transition. I happened to find a nice image of Transition magazine in a video I was watching the other day about James Joyce. Transition, which was a magazine essentially edited by Eugène Jola, who was a French poet, and it existed mostly to showcase the so-called work in progress and the writings by Samuel Beckett and other friends of Joyce around Finnegan's Wake, which was the grand avant-garde magnum opus of James Joyce when he was living in Paris, and became a huge inspiration as a sort of word mine for poets ever since, but also people like John Cage, avant-garde composers. And I think I'm missing quite a lot this idea of modernism. I also was looking at some Hans Arp sculptures and just really enjoying, because I was looking for covers of Transition, and Hans Arp did one of the covers in the late 20s, I think, for Transition. Hans Arp, these beautiful modernist forms, you really get a sense that about 100 years ago, artists were super motivated by creating this new modern condition, this new modern world. Modernism was a very... Ezra Pound, I've been reading recently as well. Ezra Pound, a key figure, really, who was pretty much there at the right moment and gave a sort of catalytic inspiration to not just T.S. Eliot, obviously, but also people like Joyce, and Marianne Moore had an affair with him, I think. All these people had a sense of mission and purpose, which I think maybe we're missing in the 21st century. We're just so bland and normcore and kind of unambitious, it seems to me. All the things which used to be possible, like crossing the Atlantic as a passenger supersonically, or going to the moon as a human being and walking on the moon, have been lost. And in fact, one of my reactions to a big news story last weekend, the fire in Glasgow, the Mackintosh building fire, tragic and heartbreaking, as everyone's been saying. I hate it when everyone uses the same adjective, but it is heartbreaking. My official statement on Facebook about it, though, was I don't want to get totally Marinetti stroke Mishima about this. Marinetti, of course, said we should burn down museums. Mishima said there was a beauty in destroying for instance, the Golden Pavilion in Kyoto, wrote a novel about that. But what a resonant exit was my thought. Assuming it is an exit, I mean, Muriel Gray assures us it will return, and the Scottish government also says the same thing. And it's now passed into the sort of the realm of the hateful word iconic Scottish buildings. So it probably has to be recreated. But I say perhaps it was better for it to sort of become an ashen crater than to become a heritage site with reverent tours. The building is a potent ghost now, seared into our memories, our national sense with the force of guilt as the future demands. Okay, you lost the ability to cross the Atlantic supersonically or send men to the moon or run a proper welfare state. I put that amongst the great technological achievements of the mid to late 20th century, running a proper welfare state. But couldn't you at least, and the EU, great modernist achievement, but couldn't you at least have passed your best building down to us? Couldn't you at least have passed it down to us, That's what the future is saying, but that's simply a future which I've extrapolated and projected from my own feelings. In fact, there may be just a bland normcore denim-wearing future that doesn't give a shit, that's really just playing computer games and listening to awful, awful music, and doesn't give a shit about Mackintosh, as in fact the people at the time didn't. He was after the art school, he didn't make another building in Scotland. He was became an alcoholic. He was really only appreciated in Vienna, and this is what I talk about in my rather irreverent lecture, which I gave in 2011, February the 18th, 2011, in the Mackintosh Building Lecture Theatre itself. It was called 27 Lies About the Mackintosh Building, and it talked about how Mackintosh had gone to Vienna. I mean, I made everything up. I just made it all up. He'd gone to Vienna with the intention to turn Glasgow in every detail into Vienna, into fin de siècle Vienna. And he gave a lecture at the Secession. And Klimt was there leafing through gold leaf, trying to order the best type of gold leaf for his paintings. And Schiele was there masturbating in the corner. And then there were other bits about how Guy de Maupassant could get erections at will, within seconds, and demonstrate them to his friends, all the rest of it. So it was, and that's really, now thinking back to the Mackintosh Building, what I really miss about it is taking it for granted. Just taking for granted that there was this amazing atmospheric, funny shaped building with these funny Art Deco sort of wooden, rather tawdry wooden decorations all through it. Just there as one of Scotland's 3 major art schools. I came down in 1981 with a bunch of friends from Gray's Art School, which was very different because it was this 1960s glass cube, it still is, in a beautiful meadow sloping down to I think it's the Dee River. And we came down, we had friends who invited us to Glasgow, and we crashed on their floor and then went into the Mackintosh Building and did some life drawing nude girls, and we was there sketching as sort of guest artists. I wasn't even an art student, I was just a friend of art students, and they invited me down. And it was the time of post-punk and new wave and postcard records and all the rest of it, and it was just the idea that this wasn't totally normal. This was how Glaswegians taught art and learned art in this building. So that's what I miss most, taking things for granted. I think this is sort of a paradox, but you pay the best kind of attention to things when you don't pay any attention to them. You just say this is normal. And this is kind of the theme, to pass on to another topic I want to discuss today, in an interesting prose poem by my friend Gilles Van Zepflin, who I'll be seeing at the end of the month. He doesn't know this yet. If you're watching, Gilles, hi. I'm going to come to Paris around about the 28th. So he's actually just published a volume of poetry which is doing very well. It's called Soleil Gris Gris, which gris gris looks like an African word, like griot or something, but I think it just means grey grey. Very much what we have here. Grey grey sun, in fact, no sun at all, because it's still the rainy season. If I look out my window, there's actually been too little light to even make a video these last few days. This is the first day with reasonable kind of lighting levels. So it's a bit like Scotland, but it's sort of hot and humid here at the same time. But anyway, Gilles' book of poetry, and there was the Marché de la Poésie in Place Saint-Sulpice last week, and Gilles was there signing copies of his book. And France Culture, the radio station, has been reading, in a sort of reading series, his poems on their network. So I made my own translation of one of them to tell you guys, and it's called Documentary, but 2 voices. First says, if I asked you to survive right now without any preparation, would you accept to survive? Second voice says, no, first of all, I'm not even sure that I would be able to. First, you mean to say that you don't have the will to survive? Second, psychologically, I'm not ready for it. Survival is a whole world of gestures, of codes, of states of mind. One doesn't just survive like that from day to day. It's not given to everyone to do that. But at this moment, you're surviving well. Yes, but I'm not in a situation of survival. I live without surviving. Paradoxical? Not at all. Living is not surviving. Living is, first of all, not surviving. Hyphenated. I don't agree. Living is, before everything else, surviving. You're essentially in a situation of survival. Well, it's true that right now I'm surviving without realizing it, but if I suddenly find myself in a survival situation, I'll notice that at the heart of my existence, survival is operating, and my life is the sum of it. So I guess it's a kind of don't look down message. It's a bit like someone who's been taking his life for granted and has suddenly been diagnosed with a potentially fatal medical problem and is in a condition of a state of survival, a state where it's a life or death question, and that is what I think Gilles is calling a state of survival. But it's a much nicer paradox in French where he says he has this distinction between vivre et survivre, to live, vivre, and to survive, survivre, as if there's an overstate of living which is surviving, or perhaps an understate, sous-vivre, would be to undervive, to not be at the same level of health, perhaps. Yeah, some crisis makes you realize that you're surviving, and that makes you realize your precarity. So I think it's a really interesting paradox. It kind of reminds me also, since we were doing Brecht this week, talking about Brecht, of another song in the Thruppenny Opera which says, mankind can keep alive thanks to its brilliance at keeping its humanity repressed. So it's the idea that to be human, you can't actually also be humane. A very Brechtian idea that we all have to be, under capitalism anyway, we have to be cowardly and trick each other, and we can't be fully moral until we have a moral system. So good for Gilles, and check out, if you speak any French at all, check out the France Culture link, which I'll put in the description underneath. I did that Brecht ballad. I did the Nightingale, the song Agnes Brunel had done. It's actually music by Michael Dressler. It's by Joachim Ringelnatz. I've been thinking, I just also wanted to mention this Belgian artist called Marcel Marien, who said, since we're in the football season, apparently, he said that football could be improved with the introduction of a second ball, which was his way of saying he didn't really give a shit about football. I totally agree, I don't give a shit about football, but I was thinking about football this week because I was, in one of my data mining exercises, I was trying to locate a football team layout as seen from above, which appeared in a magazine called Crash. I think the first issue of Crash, which was put together by an ex-ID magazine art director called Scott King in 1997, as a kind of subversive non-magazine publication. And it was a gesture against the new lad phenomenon, which at that time was the scourge of Britain, really. Everyone, bourgeois kind of trendies who were pretending to be into football, who didn't really know much about it. But So Scott King had this football team, which was all these sort of arty people like Malcolm McLaren and Gilles Deleuze and Howard Devoto was in there as well, against a much smaller team of, Chris Evans and Gaza and James Brown, who was the editor of Loaded magazine, and all the rest of it. This sort of cadre of the new lads. And but of course the team of all the artists and the brilliant minds was much bigger. So when Howard Devoto came around to my flat one day, in just near the Barbican, I showed him this poster on the wall. I said, "Look, you're in here. You're one of the arty, pretentious people who are defending us." A friend of mine in Paris recently said, "We're probably entering a new period of Puritanism and a new period of." A new period of inelegance. And I said, well, you're lucky because you're in Paris, you know, because Paris traditionally it's been seen as a home of libertinism and of elegance, you know, the fashion industry. Another thing I did in the last week was I watched a documentary about Yves Saint Laurent. Very interesting. I think it's quite a new documentary. It was on cable TV. And I particularly like, he's a really nerdy, skinny, nervous guy when he inherits unexpectedly at the age of, 21 or something, the empire of Chanel. Not Chanel, sorry, Christian Dior, who dies suddenly. And what the period of Yves Saint Laurent I like best is, it's kind of one of his missteps, because when 68 happens, May 68, and of course we've just been celebrating 50 years since May 68, and contrasting today's, phlegmatic and precarian generation with the student radicals, Daniel Cohn-Bendit and people like that, of 1968. And Yves Saint Laurent was a little bit wrong-footed. I mean, he did make a democratic gesture the year before. I think 67, he launched his pret-a-porter stores, Rive Gauche, Yves Saint Laurent, Rive Gauche. So this was kind of idea that, okay, we don't all have to just be tailoring clothes for rich people. We can have off-the-peg stuff as well for slightly poorer people. But when May 68 happened, he launched, Yves Saint Laurent launched this protest collection, so-called, in which the models on the catwalk were wearing duffel coats with gold toggles. So kind of trying to cash in on and profit from the student protests. For some reason, when I first started as Momus, I wanted to make an album about Yves Saint Laurent, somehow about that moment when he did the protest collection. And it was going to be an action to promote this album, in which I ran into the Rive Gauche store in Knightsbridge, and they had a beautiful picture, a huge photograph. I think it's Jean-Luc Sieff took this picture of a naked Yves Saint Laurent when his hair was long in about 1972. Really, his most beautiful period, when he was going a lot to Tangier, to Morocco, with friends, and sort of learning to relax a little bit, just before his drug phase really kicked in, tragically, from 76 onwards. But it was a period of happiness and of, in a way, he was rediscovering a youth he never had, because he was famous from such a young age, and so busy from such a young age, that he didn't really have time to just be a young person and do the normal things. So he did that a bit in his 30s. So I was going to destroy across this very delicate image of the fine-boned and feline, feminine Yves Saint Laurent. I'm fascinated by him as a kind of a dandy and an aesthete, who's kind of a rock star as well. Some of the images in that period, especially in the 70s, he's really rock star-like. What else has been interesting me? Ian Breakwell's diary. I found an amazing video. I think it's on Vimeo, actually. It's on ubu.com. Ian Breakwell, look up in the film section of Ubu, Ian Breakwell's continuous diary. He lived on St. John Street, directly above the St. John restaurant, which I used to go to because I lived just around the corner. When I lived in London in the late 90s, I lived in Long Lane. And so a lot of Ian Breakwell's work it's very much like some of my work is diaristic, or just looking out your window and sort of describing things. So I was making songs about, piles of slithering meat at Smithfield Meat Market and stuff like that. My pervert doppelganger mentioned Smithfield. Ian Breakwell, 10 years before that, or 15 years or so before that, was shooting pictures of an old tramp walking by outside his window, but also keeping these diaries, which turned into video diaries. He started making programs for Channel 4, the early radical experimental days of Channel 4, when Jeremy Isaacs was in charge. And so in a sense it was a bit like what I'm trying to do now with the Open University, but he had an actual TV network behind him, an amazing anomalous time, which didn't last very long. But independently, I'd found a copy of these continuous diaries, which I think Picador published, and taken photographs. I often do this, I sort of microfilm a book in a library and read it later. So I've been reading that and thinking this is a really interesting account of Britain in the 70s and 80s. But then also I found there was this TV version on ubu.com. So I recommend that if you're into diaries and things, which I am very much so. What else? What else do I have to say? There was an earthquake in Osaka. That was quite nerve-wracking. I was worried about my ex-partner Hisai. She emailed saying, "Thank you for carrying me. I am okay. I'm sure you wouldn't bear this big shake. Maybe you were lucky you left Osaka." So it's like Japanese people are sort of inured to these events, but I would have been terrified apparently. But actually, my sort of stand-in as a vlogger in Osaka is a guy called Daniel, and he was not particularly impressed by the earthquake. He was in fact a bit disappointed that it wasn't more dramatic, there weren't more things smashed, because he could have got a good vlog out of it. In fact, his vlog was just him sitting in the park late at night with people milling around worried about aftershocks. And the main comments that I read under that were that it's amazing that women can walk around in Japan at night perfectly safely, which is true. So in a sense, really, the main danger is not earthquakes. The main danger in the world in general is your sense of danger comes from how safe you feel on the streets, and that comes from how harmonious the society is. So it all goes back to politics, essentially. I'm about to plunge back into Europe to a less harmonious social situation, so I'll have some culture shock. And in fact, one of the first things I do when I get back to Berlin is I have to give a little talk about precisely culture shock of returnees from Japan coming back to Europe. That is the topic of the talk, which I'm giving at a place called Place/Making. I can't remember the date, but and then I have a few more events. Like I'm going to perform in Paris in October at the night of the Nuit Blanche, the night when the museums stay open late, at the Jewish Museum actually in Paris. Again, a site of some tension, obviously, in terms of religio-ethnic tensions. And then I'm also doing a thing in Bologna in Italy, and we'll seize the opportunity probably to see Manifesta in Palermo in Sicily. And so I'm sort of gearing. This has been my continuous sense of precarity when I'm in Japan. I'm always aware that I'm going to come to the end of the 90-day visa that I'm on. I'm always on a tourist visa. This is a particularly resonant one because it's probably the last of that sequence of tourist visas I've been coming in on since late 2010. I will come back next year. I think I'll come back every year essentially for a couple of months, but it won't be the same. There won't be this sense of almost continuous residence interrupted by these sort of reluctant exits, but at the same time I kind of do appreciate that they shake me up and they give me new experiences, and I meet new people and all the rest of it. So I also wanted to mention some music I've been enjoying. Jon Hassell has a new album out. It's called Listening to Pictures, Pentimento Volume 1. That's great. I've been listening to a lot of Jon Hassell actually, even before I knew he was releasing a new album. He's at 83 or something now. So I listened. I find his music fantastically sensual and atmospheric. It's great for the rainy season. Somehow there's a great sense of fertility and rain, tropicality in his music. Dream Theory and Malaya is a perennial favourite of mine. He did some slightly more ropey ones in the later 80s, but he's really sort of returned to form with this new one. I recommend it a lot. It's got a slightly glitchy drum and bassy kind of thing. Pentimento actually means something made up with fragments of other pictures, kind of collage thing. And I think he's actually sampled some of his earlier sounds, like some of the drum patterns and the trumpet lines sound quite familiar. I think he's remade some of his old music in this, but it does sound quite fresh, and it's a bit more skittery and drum and bassy, almost as if you could almost imagine David Bowie with his jazz direction in his very last records working with Jon Hassell, which he never did. Interestingly, Hassell worked with Eno and with David Sylvian. I think it was almost a guarantee if you worked with David Sylvian that you would never again work with David Bowie, because it was almost too close to home. I mean, Fripp never worked again after he worked with Sylvian, never worked again with Bowie. So Sylvian almost became a parallel world Bowie and went off doing this much more arty version, at least through most of the 80s and 90s, than what Bowie was doing, and doing glitchy stuff and territories that Bowie never quite went into. So I did follow Sylvian. I kind of wanted Bowie to be more Sylvian-like, more delicate and refined, and taking influence from Japan continuously, all that stuff which Sylvian continued to do. And the other thing I wanted to mention, actually the last thing, is quite a sad thing that Craig Perennan-Wilson, who was also known as Revolter, died of cancer a month or so ago, in April actually. And I just wanted to note that he was the person who commissioned my Hearspool series, which also is on ubu.com. And it's one of the things I've been most proud of that I've done. It started in 2013, and I was doing these things initially for a basic FM, which was something, a digital radio that Craig was involved with in Newcastle, where he came from. I had only really met Craig a few times. He curated for the Star and Shadow Cinema, which was a fantastic old place. They've now moved to a new space in Newcastle. They still exist. But he invited me to do a sort of performance there, and then to do these radiophonic broadcasts, which were drawing on the German idea of the Neue Hörspiel, stuff done by Deutschlandfunk and by WDR. Felix Kubin did some, who's actually the only other person I profiled for the Wire magazine, apart from Ishmaru. Felix Kubin did some really good, which if you can find them somewhere, I'd really recommend. And yeah, I just wanted to note his passing and say that he's survived by his girlfriend, Krista, who's Finnish, and who was actually, I knew her before I knew Craig, because she was in the video for Trust Me, I'm a Doctor, for instance, or the video for The Angels of Wires, which you can find on YouTube. She was one of the actors in the Man of Letters documentary, which was made about me in Finland in 1993. So Krista is still with us, thank goodness. And I managed to thank Craig while he was still alive for what he'd done. I last met him in 2015 in Bristol, just by chance on the street. It was his birthday. I was playing a show in Bristol. He couldn't come to the show because he was having a birthday party somewhere else. But that was the last time I saw him, 2015. So perhaps I can dedicate this vlog to the memory of Craig Perennan-Wilson.
Open University.